Everyone on this very sunny Sunday, so nice that you're all here. I have a wonderful panel and we are going to talk about new platforms, new audiences from very different perspectives. We have Dina Elsayed coming from Audible and from radio and from audio production, which I think has become much more important the last years. We have Avital Lavi, who is working for Alternativa, which is an NGO focused on impact and new edition in impact distribution. And we have Anna Desponds from The Catalyst, who is looking at it from a very analytic side, I would say, but also having a background in doc festivals and curating. So I think it's a very nice mixture, giving different perspectives. So I would start the question with a question to all three of you. We are talking about non-fiction formats and how the world changes. So what are the biggest changes that you have seen in the last 2 years in your particular field you are coming from? Maybe we start with Dina, with the audio field, because I think that took off during Corona quite largely and changed a bit.
For sure. The last 2 years have been full of changes, and I find it even hard to list the changes off the top of my mind, which I think everybody agrees with, the rise of video podcasts. People watching podcasts and not listening to them is a big thing. I was at a podcast festival in London last year already, and the biggest talking point in all the sessions that I attended, and it's the biggest podcast festival in Europe, was video podcasts. I think that's a big change, and people are trying to adapt that. Different platforms are trying to adapt to that. Journalists are trying to adapt to that. And I think it changed the realm of how people produce audio and write scripts for audio stories. Another big update is obviously the rise of AI and it being such a crucial member of the scripting community. How people shape stories is driven by AI, and most recently as well, creating voice and sounds by AI as a source. It's not just nature, it's not just voice acting. AI has become a very available medium and tool that people use to replace a lot of otherwise analog material that people use in audio. I think these are the main two changes in audio, and also the changes of where funding comes from and where which stories find visibility because of where funding comes from. We find that there is a lot of spaces for independent voices, but there's also monopoly over who gets distribution. And I think it's very interesting to see both dynamics, like both ends of the spectrum playing out at the same time, which results in a very interesting explosion of content and material that 10 years ago were not even conceivable.
Vital, I think that's a nice turnover to what you're doing at Alternativa. You're supporting mainly documentaries focusing or coming from the global south in a way, and you're now starting to support them with distribution. How does that feed into this monopoly of distribution and making stories accessible to a broader audience?
Yeah, so to anyone who doesn't know, Alternativa Film Project is a nonprofit film project that started as a nomadic film festival. We just had our third edition in Colombia 3 weeks ago. And we are developing now to film distribution. So very much like the change in trends. We do go directly ahead to the older approach of film distribution. So currently, I mean, I'm curating films, we're scouting for films, and then we're going to distribute them in the old-fashioned ways. But we do plan to do a few outstanding steps in order to do it in the best way. So firstly, we focus on impact films, and we intend to measure the impact of those films. So we plan to use focus groups. We plan to use once a year an academic partner who would help us to do a comprehensive academic research on how a certain film is able to really change reality. We already have a good experience from previous film called Bride Kidnapping, which is a drama about kidnapping of women in Kazakhstan for the sake of forced marriage. This film, with a comprehensive impact campaign, managed to be a part of a movement that and ultimately managed to change reality. So we changed legislation, and now women kidnapping is criminalized in Kazakhstan because of that. So we hope that we will get to such results in the future. We also use a new financial model which we developed so that we can really support the filmmakers. We do, by the way, both documentaries and fiction. Our catalog is going to be made of around 50-50, fiction and documentaries. And we focus on Global South. And I think this is also continuing to the question of what changed in the past 2 years. I think that the Global North is becoming a bit disappointed of itself, and eyes are now on Global South, trying to understand how creators and creativity can really amplify those stories.
Anna, the Catalyst is looking into many things, amongst other the future of certain topics. If you see what Alternativa is doing in like classic film distribution combined with impact, but also what Dina is saying about the change of storytelling, how AI feeds more into that, what's your perspective from a very observant point of view, how these changes affect the whole environment? What do you see as the future of cinema, of films?
Okay, I have some answers to your previous question, so let me rethink this. So the question is, how do these changes change cinema? Because I was prepared to talk about the changes, so maybe I will start by telling you what I was thinking about the changes we've been experiencing in the few years. And yes, indeed, it's AI, which also I remember 2 years ago, at this time of the year, if I'm counting right, I was working on a program for the biggest digital arts festival, I think in the world, Ars Electronica, about AI and creativity. And this was a hot curatorial topic just 2 years ago, AI and creativity. Now it's really part of the workflows, from storytelling, A/B testing, distribution, accessibility. There are tools like Sora, so this is the one change I saw. And I think talking about impact, this is something which is about accessibility, which is about maybe finding new distribution pathways. So this is something that I could see happening. Second thing regarding audio and film, I think there's also this concept of liquid media, liquid content. And the fact that with AI, you can do really quickly and test really quickly different forms for your content, right? You don't spend so much, you don't need to spend hours on production to have a rough idea or a rough draft that you can just polish. We know very well that there's this rule, I don't know what's the rule, but 50% of the time to produce 70 or 80% of something, and then 50% of the time to polish this up. So, of course, there's a lot of work needed, but I think this change, this pivot into prototyping very quickly, let's check an idea, so this is a big change, and this leads to the concept of liquid content, which means that maybe in the future, the core of what we will see what will be produced will be the story, will be the character, will be the goal that we have or the impact that we want to create. But then the form that follows, whether it's going to be a film that's going to be screened or a podcast that's going to be listened to or some sort of interactive format, then it's going to be more secondary. And the third thing, actually there's two more things I noted to your previous questions about trends. One, talking about new audiences and new platforms. I think a big change that we're going to be seeing is the social media ban for young audiences, which will have to reshape the way we think of distributing content or information for young audiences. And the last thing I noted for your previous question, which also has to do with impact somehow, is the NFT and blockchain collapse, because I think there was a lot of hope in alternative ways of financing and producing content outside of the economical system that we're all part of, but I think this collapsed. So the value system and the business system has to be reinvented. So I'm not sure it responds fully to your question, but at least maybe it fits into the conversation.
It does, and it gives me new points of questions, because if, Avital, you said you're looking in a very classic distribution way, but what we have heard here the last days is that more and more filmmakers and producers are thinking about, in a way, liquid media or producing more formats out of one story. Is that something that you at Alternativa are also looking at, like supporting filmmakers in creating one story on different media or lengths?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we're ultimately working towards bringing people to traditional platforms in order to change the ecosystem, but we will definitely bring them through the new platforms. So we intend to either do complementary content or good old targeted campaigns. This is for now. Later on, we may explore short form, because we know that short form also has good discourse potential, good distribution potential. So,
Dina, what I have heard the last days over and over again is that more and more filmmakers are thinking about accompanying their film or their project with a podcast, or like Fredrik Gerden was here telling us about his film Push, where because the distribution was stopped by Corona, he started a podcast with the same topic. How do you see that? Do you see like it's coming more and more interconnected?
I think all forms of media are becoming more and more interconnected, and I think this applies in both like big platforms and independent producers and content creators as well. I think podcasts and audio production in general provides a lot more intimacy and immediacy than film production can fail in doing, mostly because of cost. It's a big part of it, but also because it's a component or a medium that can be consumed with a lot more flexibility than film. Everybody listens to podcasts on their phone. Everybody has access to that. You can listen to it when you're driving, when you're cooking, when you're commuting, when you're just walking. And I think this provides accessibility to a broad audience that might not be able to see this film in this independent festival or on this very, very niche streaming platform. For example, I think even big platforms like Netflix are now making podcasts accompanying to certain titles. And I think it speaks to how versatile this medium is and how accessible it is, and this explosion in accessibility that podcasts have had over the past couple of years. I think Corona specifically marked a huge shift because in COVID, we were all confined in our spaces, and what is more suitable to create a podcast than a confined space? When I was working for NPR in the 2010s out of Cairo, we had a very small bureau. It was myself and the bureau producer, and our studio was in the closet of the flat where the correspondent was living. And now in COVID, everybody had that closet, which was their living room, and everybody had their equipment, which was their laptop or phone or whatever they can record audio from. So I think podcasts accompanying other mediums has become kind of like, when you have an audiobook and you have this PDF attached to that, it's become kind of that. It's almost an add-on that a lot of people will begin to expect to be available now.
Maybe a follow-up question on that, because at the beginning you mentioned that video podcasts become more and more common, but for me a podcast, as you said, is something I just plug in my ears and I can listen to no matter what I'm doing. So if you look, I don't know if you know that, but if you compare numbers, how many people do actually watch the videos and how many just consume the audio version of it?
I have very strong opinions about video podcasts because I'm a radio person. I grew up with radio. I worked with radio. I did podcasts before podcasts were podcasts. They were just audio pieces. So when I speak about that, I think my opinions really shine through. And I find that there is a very, like anecdotally speaking, there is a very clear cutoff point who listens to podcasts and who watches podcasts. And I think, again, anecdotally, I do not have like data to back this up, but most younger people, and by that I mean, I guess, Gen Alpha, just watch podcasts. I think most of the time when we see video podcasts, it's not, the camera is not a player. It's not a way that we tell the story forward. It's not sound, it's not archive material. It's just a camera with two people speaking in what I could otherwise consume without seeing these two people. I think the camera just adds a bit of, it's a player in the sense that it changes the dynamic into a more performative talk show vibe rather than a very intimate, in my ear, just to me alone story. And I think it's a matter of attention span, it's a matter of, retention of information. Video podcasts can be edited into like 30-second, 40-second clips that people can listen to and scroll, or watch and scroll. Whereas if you want to create an only audio story, that it needs so much to capture people, to keep them listening, especially when we're living in an age where content is content. It's not pieces anymore, it's not long form, it's not the standard way of consuming media anymore. And I think video comes there because it just captures people faster.
Anna, in our pre-conversation, you mentioned your excitement when you tested your first DVD back in the ages when it was new, that you could just plug it into a computer. And Dina just said that this individuality of when and where and how fast, and if I skip something, how do you see that nowadays that everything is available online and everyone can watch it individually? Where comes this, do you, like from your observations and your experience, where does the cinema come in as a place of watching things together?
I'm not sure everything is available online. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Also, this is the problem, not the solution, right? Everything is online, and I think the curatorial role that festivals are playing, or whatever other events, cinemas, I think it's on the rise. And if you look at programs like Cineville, or I do have like this anecdotal also evidence of a young cousin of mine who asked me, first of all, if I knew what South Park was. Well, and then she told me that she's taking the train for 6 hours with her friend to go to a cinema screening of South Park, which, well, I found it's a bit excessive, but then she said it's something that they do regularly, right? And I'm not saying this is your new business model and you should trust my cousin on that, but apparently there is a need from people to get curated content in an environment that is going to be a safe environment, where you would have the full attention, you would give the full attention to the medium, and it all is an event, right? So this is what cinema used to be like, at least in the US. Friday night, you go to the cinema, you get a meal, and this is what it was. It was a ritual. And in today's world, we don't have these rituals. One of the problems is that in Netflix, you just pay your subscription, or whatever platform you pay your subscription, and everything is available for free. You can also start a film and change your mind after 3 minutes, which is a huge problem actually for the films. But change your mind after 3 minutes and just go to the next one. Once you pay €20 to go to the cinema, it's a big expense for the family. So I guess if the audience feels like there's an added value. It's not only the film, but it's an experience. It's a meeting. It's a place that you would go to as a lifestyle choice. Then I think this is a place where people would probably want to go and watch films. And this is what festivals were about, right? About the festivity of watching films. It's not about the film. Even when you look at strategies, right? Back in the times, it was a 35mm print that then was sold to the cinema, to TV, and then was in your not DVD, the cassette, VHS cassette. I see, I'm like this, I don't even remember what the word was, right? We moved so fast. But this was the distribution line. And now very often you do have the premiere, the online premiere that is even preceding the cinema premiere to build on the momentum, right? So I think it's, yeah, I know if it's, sorry, I just...
Avidal, if we are talking about like how to bring people back to the cinemas and how to make people watch curated content, in that sense, as you're starting doing that and curating a line that you're then selling to in a very traditional way, what role does the impact strategy attached to the films play in this? How does it motivate people watching films and like also maybe your buyers to step into those films?
That's very interesting, and I'm going to answer it also following to what Anna just said. I do also think that there is still a problem of accessibility to a lot of content worldwide. This is why we're focusing on Global South, because we feel that we could potentially bring a story from a small country in Latin America or Southeast Asia or Africa or Middle East, which is very relevant socially to another Global South country, but they don't have any way to even hear about this film. So that's one aspect that we're trying to solve also by localizing to all local languages. But concerning impact, so the way we treat our audience is by segmenting them to different cohorts based on their level of engagement and interest in impact. So it could be people who are somewhere on the spectrum between interested in following impact trends to actually activists, or it can be people who are directly affected by injustice in the Global South, or it can be people who actually live very comfortably but want to see how the other side lives. So by doing this, and also people who are decision makers, we treat them as audience as well, because if we can impact the decision makers, you know, there we can actually cause actual systemic change. So this is how we approach it, basically, by trying to figure out how we can speak to each one of these audiences.
Dina, if we talk about curated content, you have been recently or until now working for Audible, but before for public radio. What are the boundaries or the differences between working for profit versus working for public radio, and in particular with Audible being attached to Amazon and the whole environment around that?
Yeah, I think, wow, it could not be worlds apart, both experiences working for NPR and NPR adjacent networks and working for Audible. I think for me, as a journalist by trade and by study, the biggest difference was just the driving question why we're making a specific story or why we're pushing for a specific project. I think when I worked for public radio, I come from a news background. My first job was working on the field, recording protests, doing news reports, and the question was always, okay, is this story worth telling? Is there a news element in it? Is there a human interest element in it? Like all of these questions that we learned in journalism school. And I think over the course of my career in public radio, this question has also changed and developed. At first there were no podcasts, and then there became podcasts, and the question became, is this durable? Can we play this on different platforms? Will this story develop into a written piece or a video piece? So the question kind of broadened a bit. working for a platform, like a private platform like Audible, I found that the question driving why we make things is very different. And the question was, will this reach as many people as possible? And as a journalist, this was very shocking to me because it changes the goal completely. And it became, how can we make content that is as likable as possible? And by likable, it means that a lot of edges are going to be shaved off, and a lot of political nuances are going to be erased, because we don't want to talk about problematic things, because that will push some people away, but we want everybody to like what we're doing. And it's different, and you find that the metrics of what success is also different. And it's different when you're an independent body that applies for funding, for grants, in order to make a specific story, than from being someone with an endless flow of money, doing whatever story you think will create more money. And it changes the dynamic completely, and it changes what makes things matter. I think that was the most, from my experience, what I thought was very, very different. I think Audible still produces a lot of really good content. During my time there for 2 years, I managed to work on a couple of really exciting investigative storytelling that is very important and that I'm very, very, very proud of. But again, it seemed like an exception to the rule so far.
Anna, maybe, I don't know what's your observation on that is, but for me, working with documentary films, just observing them from the outside, it seems like that political sharp documentaries and impactful films, I have this, in the back of my mind, I have Seaspiracy, for example, a Netflix production, which was very, very successful by being political. Do you think that this sharpening of the edges really opens an audience, or do films sometimes benefit from having edges and reaching audiences through that, creating conversations?
I think in the platformization era, I guess, we're on the Audible boat, which is, if it reaches a lot of people, then it's good. But also, I think maybe creating some sort of dialogue or controversy would be also something interesting. I don't know, I don't have any clear view on that, but my bet would be that we're in the middle content, general content, this is where we're aiming at. And also with the algorithmization, I think it's just looking for the medium common ground somehow. But at the same time, I'm thinking as I'm speaking, I think this also is why we have so much polarization in society at the same time, because you are not getting nuances, you are losing a lot of this nuance, things are either or, right? Computers have just two numbers, 1 or 0. Oh no, quantum computers not, but well, maybe that's the future. But we're in this polarized world, I think, also because of that, because there's no, the things which would be more nuanced or dialogue-based, they don't really have space on the internet. And this is also why young kids go to see South Park in the cinema, because it brings this other layer to the thing. So, yeah.
Avital, you have been, some years ago, working for TikTok on the nonfiction department. What was your experience there in terms of algorithm and with bringing news curated, factual nonfiction onto that platform?
So I was both in charge of partnerships with the news publishers, but also on bringing some documentary and other formats of non-factual into the ecosystem. And the goal was to increase critical thinking. However, it was not a very successful experiment in the end. I think that this is because ultimately, content, when it comes to algorithm-based platforms, that is also UGC, is very much based on what would the moderators do and how they would treat it. So moderators are humans. They live in societies. They have biases. And in an ecosystem that is going a bit more towards nationalism, ultimately, unfortunately, they work.
Diana, how much does algorithm play a role at Audible, and which podcasts are presented to me? Do you know? I know you were a podcast producer, but if you can share insights on that. And is there a way to break through algorithms?
That's a very tough question. I wish I had the answer to that. Again, I will not speak on behalf of Audible because I don't have the capacity to do that. But again, this goes to your previous question about the differences between working for public radio and for Audible. I think working for bigger platforms with bigger funding creates the privilege to have a more reactive position. So by that I mean you notice what the trending topics are in society on different platforms, and then you create things that capitalize on that or that react to that. So we always, over the past couple of years, of course, the longevity and optimizing your body to the best and most maximum viable ability was such a huge topic, and then you would find that the most trending topics in the nonfiction productions were health podcasts and mental health podcasts and just basically longevity-driven podcasts, how to eat the best way to make your body the best it could be, whatever that means. So that was definitely a big one. Another topic, which is also, you find it in the equivalent platforms on video, is true crime. It's a big one. People love that because, because I think there are PhDs written about that, the value of true crime to audiences and how close yet distant you are from horror. I think it creates, it could be addictive, and I've seen how the most successful podcasts on Audible, at least in Germany, are the true crime podcasts, which also, like, as someone who comes from journalism, is a bit jarring because it's a very voyeuristic genre.
And I've also heard they're running out of stories.
Yeah, there's only that many crimes, and also, thankfully, we're not in the United States of America, where the accessibility to guns and to crime is so is on a daily basis. So I think what I noticed also recently in like the various productions from Audible and otherwise is that sometimes when I read the reviews to podcasts, people are writing things like, "Oh, I've heard the story before. Can you come up with something else?" And it just says to like how oversaturated this genre has become.
But also how it seems like very, very big.
And it's still working, and still like the most pitches I was getting when I was still at Audible were true crime pitches. So yeah, the most listened to genres were true crime and health, longevity.
Interesting.
Which I find both, especially in unison together, very toxic.
We had an interesting reading the other day. It's called a book, Die Achtsamkeitsfalle, which is exactly on that self-optimization and how difficult that can be and dangerous. That was, if anyone is looking for a good German book recommendation. We have, like, the session is planned in two parts. One part, us having a conversation, being live streamed. The second part being closed, and you guys joining in and having a more in-depth, intimate conversation. So before we start going into the second part of the conversation, maybe a question to all three of you. If we talk about new platforms, new audiences, what is your hope? What is, like, with all the negative parts we see in social media, in algorithm, in everything, where do you think see a glimpse of hope and a possibility? Maybe we start with Avital on that.
I see a lot of hope looking at creators. because there are so many important stories, and like I said earlier, so many important stories in some parts of the world can touch other people. And it takes a lot of guts and a lot of resources to create a good documentary film. So this keeps me hopeful. Yeah.
Anna, what's your take on that?
I think the great part is the siloing of industries. We're sitting here together with the podcast person and the film person and whoever I am, right? So I think it's great that these paths interact. And I think also talking about new platforms, I really think when you open up your thinking from I have a great story and I want to make a film to I have a great story, maybe it should be a video game because everything is accessible, because also with AI and tech that comes in, I can code, right? So suddenly I think story goes back to the center because we are not siloed actually in the medium that we've been using. So I think it's great also for the business because somehow we're a bit stuck with the model we have, and we can also learn from other industries. And I think game is actually a great example because it's an industry that can be doing very well if you lead it to the right direction. So this is my hope.
It's a beautiful hope. Dina?
I would only amplify what my colleagues just said. I think the other thing is just seeing how accessible opportunities are. I hope we kind of focus on that rather than what we suffer because of this monopoly over voices and over platforms. I think the creators are our hope, and the mediums that we have are their tools to manifest this hope. I think it's also amazing that for now we find that we're looking to other spaces, the Global South, for stories. For a really long time, the only places we sought when we were thinking about narrative audio were NPR and the BBC, and now it's not the case anymore. There's so many other places that we can turn to, and I hope it's only the beginning, and I hope we can find a way to manage to power through the bricks of monopoly, and spaces like this are where this can happen. I'm just listening to the 5 podcasts that are part of this festival, and I'm amazed by how different they are and how powerful they are in different ways, even though each of them has a very different storytelling mechanism and storytelling tool and audiences even. But there's such a beautiful manifestation of what people can do and the different stories that have not been heard yet, and that gives me hope.
Thank you so much. So just as a small advertisement break in between, if you're interested into really interested form of storytelling, tonight we have an English reading of Brave a New World, which is a beautiful big book telling positive stories. And I think when we talk about forms of nonfiction storytelling, books are also like really important and giving a beautiful insight. And then we are having the podcast Stories from the Beauty Parlor, which is also a really interesting format, and I think it's going to be fun to listen to it. And now we go off the live stream and into the conversations. Thank you so much for this first part.